The sun was sinking low over the mesas, spilling its last gold across the desert floor. Shadows stretched long and thin, as if the earth itself was trying to hold onto the light for just one more breath. I remember those evenings clear as yesterday, when the men they called the Broken Spurs walked through town like ghosts of what they once were. You could see it in their eyes, not just hunger, but the deeper ache of men cast out by the very soil they worked. They weren't born villains. No, once they were steady ranch hands, men of calloused palms and quiet honor. But the world has a way of twisting stories, and sometimes shame can cling to a man longer than his own shadow. Caleb Mercer was the tall one, shoulders square, but heart bent beneath the weight of falsehoods. He carried silence like it was a second skin. Beside him walked Elias Crow, older, face roughened with scars from another war no one cared to remember. His bitterness was sharper than his knife, and sometimes it spilled over like whiskey gone bad. Then there was Jesse Boyd, the youngest, restless eyes, laughter too loud, as if he could shout down the shame that clung to his name. Together, they walked like brothers bound not by choice, but by exile. It had started with whispers, a missing head of cattle here, a rancher swearing he saw shadows near the creek at night. By the time the sheriff stood them before the people of Dust Haven, the whispers had turned into verdicts. I stood among the crowd that day. Folks pressed shoulder to shoulder, faces set hard like stone. The sheriff, Tom Rourke, a man who'd seen too much of both law and lawlessness, looked them over with eyes that carried sorrow more than anger. Still, duty bound him. He read out the charges, his voice thick as dust in the throat. Cattle rustlers, he called them. And with that, the sentence was passed. They weren't hanged, though some called for it. Instead, their spurs, the very symbol of their labor, their pride, were broken off and cast into the dirt. I can still hear the sound, sharp as bones snapping. Caleb bent to pick his up, but a boot heel pinned it down, grinding it deeper into the dust. The men didn't fight, didn't argue. They just stood there, carrying their disgrace like heavy chains. And when they walked down Main Street after, saloon doors swung shut, shutters closed, children pulled behind skirts. Folks didn't need a rope to bury them. The shame did the job well enough. That night, they camped at the edge of town, near the ridges where the coyotes sang their sad songs. Their fire burned low, as if afraid of being seen. Caleb sat quiet, staring into the embers, the glow painting hollows under his eyes. Elias drank deep from a flask, muttering curses against every man in Dust Haven. Jesse paced, restless as a young colt, hands twitching toward the revolver at his side. Hunger gnawed at them, but pride kept them from stealing bread. Caleb's voice, low and steady, cut through the dark. We ain't what they say we are. Don't let their lies turn true. Elias only spat into the fire. Jesse just laughed, but it was a laughter without joy. The days wore on, and the town forgot them only enough to remember them with hate. Whispers followed every hoofprint they left in the dust. I recall one afternoon when the schoolteacher, Clara Mayfield, came riding her wagon back from the trading post. The wheel caught a rut, splitting clean, and she was left stranded just beyond town. She struggled with it, her bonnet slipping in the heat, hands raw against stubborn wood. Caleb happened upon her. He didn't say a word at first, just knelt down, sleeves rolled, and worked until the wheels set straight again. She thanked him, voice soft but steady, eyes carrying none of the judgment the rest of us bore. Caleb only tipped his hat, ready to walk away, when she pressed a canteen into his hand. A simple gift, water cool against the throat, but more than that, it was the first kindness shown to him since his name was blackened. Folks on the road saw it. Their whispers sharpened like knives, but Clara didn't flinch. Still, kindness was a rare mercy in Dust Haven. Most nights, the men found themselves shut out of the saloon, turned from a mercantile, eyed like wolves circling sheep. I remember Elias one evening, pushing through the batwing doors, demanding whiskey. The room fell quiet, every man's hand twitching near his belt. The barkeep refused him. Elias's jaw clenched, his fingers curling around his revolver. It was Caleb who stepped in, steady hand on his brother's shoulder, voice low but cutting. If we give them the fight they're hungry for, we'll never crawl out of the grave they've dug for us. Elias's hand trembled, but at last he let the anger pass. They left under a storm of glares and silence, and I swear the weight of that silence was heavier than any bullet. Then came a night when Jesse vanished. The fire burned low, only 2 bedrolls laid out in the dust. Caleb rose before dawn, finding Jesse's place empty, his saddle gone. An unease settled in, thicker than the desert night air. By morning, word came from the North Ranch. A man dead, cattle missing, blood spilled on the sand. Dusthaven didn't wait for truth. By noon, voices swore they saw the broken Spurs riding out under moonlight. Sheriff Rourke gathered his deputies, faces grim with duty. They rode hard for the mesa, dust trailing like smoke behind them. Where they found Caleb and Elias, the men stood ready. Elias's hand hovered near his pistol, rage burning in his eyes. But Caleb, weary and unyielding, only lifted his hands slow, palms open to the sky. "We didn't do this," he said, his voice steady as stone. Dust swirled around them. The sheriff's rifle aimed true, the deputy's spurs clinking sharp in the silence. And there, on that barren ridge, the last light of day painted them not as rustlers, not as killers, but as men caught in the cruel snare of a town's judgment. That was how they fell, branded guilty once more, before the truth even had a chance to breathe. The cell was dark, the air thick with the smell of iron and dust. Light slanted through the barred window, cutting the gloom into narrow bands, as if the outside world had shrunk to a handful of sunlit stripes. Caleb sat against the wall, knees drawn, eyes fixed on nothing, as though he was already halfway gone. Elias paced the length of the cell, his boots scuffing grooves into the floor, his anger rattling louder than the chains that bound them. Sheriff Tom Rourke sat at his desk a few feet away, hat low over his brow, studying them with the weary gaze of a man torn between law and memory. "You boys know what they're saying out there," Rourke muttered finally. "They're building a gallows in their heads already. Won't be long before they build it with their hands." Caleb lifted his eyes, calm despite the storm around him. "You can strip a man of his spurs, Sheriff," he said, voice low, but not of his soul. "We didn't kill that rancher." Rourke stared at him, jaw tight, but said nothing. Outside, Dusthaven hummed with fever. Men sharpened their words like knives. Women gathered at wells, their whispers carrying louder than bells. And somewhere out there, Jesse Boyd, the youngest of the broken Spurs, rode with a shadow darker than shame trailing him. When Clara Mayfield stepped through the jailhouse door, the hush that followed was almost reverent. She carried a basket, cloth draped over the top, the faint smell of bread and apples seeping through. Rourke grunted, shifting in his chair, but didn't stop her. Clara moved with quiet courage, her shoes soft against the boards. She set the basket down, then knelt by the bars, her eyes searching Caleb's face. "You'll need strength," she whispered, sliding a loaf toward him. Her hand brushed his as he took it, a fleeting touch that lingered like a promise neither dared to speak. Caleb felt it like fire and mercy both. Elias scoffed under his breath, but even he softened as the warmth of food filled his hands. That night, Clara asked questions, gentle but unrelenting. She'd heard whispers, fragments of truth buried beneath fear. Jesse had been seen riding near the North Ridge, drinking with Clayton Briggs, a name Dusthaven knew too well. Briggs was no rancher. He was an outlaw, a wolf who fed on the weak and called it living. Clara pressed harder, her courage carrying her into shadows few dared step. She found Jesse in the livery stable, the moonlight slicing across his face as he saddled a horse. His hands shook, his words cracked when she cornered him. "They'll hang Caleb and Elias," she said, her voice sharp with more steel than sorrow. "But it wasn't them, was it? It was you." Jesse's eyes darted like a trapped animal's. His mouth twisted, guilt spilling out in broken pieces. He had fallen in with Briggs's gang, lured by promises of quick gold, of freedom from hunger and shame. He hadn't meant for blood to spill, but once it did, there was no going back. And now Briggs planned worse. a raid on Dusthaven itself, to strip it bare come dawn. Clara's heart pounded as she left the stable, her breath ragged with the weight of what she carried. The town would not believe her. To them, she was only a widow, her word as fragile as paper in a storm. But to Caleb and Elias, her truth might mean life. When she returned to the jailhouse, her resolve was steady. In the hush of night, she unlocked the cell, keys trembling in her hand. Elias stared at her as if she'd gone mad. But Caleb only watched, eyes steady and searching. "If you ride out now," Clara whispered, "you can stop Briggs. You can stop Jesse from damning himself forever." Caleb hesitated, the weight of choice heavy as iron in his chest. If he ran, it would brand him guilty forever in the eyes of Dusthaven. But if he stayed, the town would hang him before the sun was high. And still, there was her faith. A single hand reaching through bars, telling him he was worth saving. That was enough. They rode into the night, the desert swallowing their hoofbeats, the stars above watching in silence. The air grew colder as they neared Blood Canyon, where Briggs and his gang had gathered, their laughter echoing off the stone walls, rifles gleaming in the firelight. Caleb and Elias crouched among the rocks, studying the outlaws with eyes sharpened by survival. When the fight came, it came like thunder. Guns cracked, the canyon walls flashing with fire. Dust rose in choking clouds. Horses screamed. Men shouted. Steel clashed. Caleb moved with the steady grace of a man who had spent his life in rhythm with the land. Elias fought with fury, every bullet a spit against the shame he carried. Jesse stumbled into the chaos, torn between the gang he'd sworn to and the men he'd once called brothers. Briggs barked at him to shoot, his voice sharp as a whip. But Jesse's hand trembled, his aim faltered. Caleb saw it, the boy's soul dangling over the edge, and in that moment he made his choice. The shot he fired was not at Jesse, but at Briggs. The outlaw leader fell, his gun dropping into the dust, his reign of fear ending in silence. The rest of the gang scattered, vanishing into the night like jackals sensing their alpha's death. The canyon grew still again, save for the ragged breaths of those who remained. Jesse dropped his gun, eyes wet, shoulders shaking. He had betrayed them, yes. But Caleb did not raise his weapon against him. Instead, he lowered it, the act of mercy greater than any bullet. Grace was the only thing stronger than shame, and Caleb gave it freely. When the three rode back into Dusthaven, dawn was breaking, painting the town in pale light. Behind them, Jesse hung his head, the weight of his guilt plain for all to see. The townsfolk gathered, their silence thicker than dust. Sheriff Rourke stood at the front, his eyes searching Caleb's face. "Proof enough?" Caleb asked, his voice worn but unyielding. He gestured to Jesse, to the outlaw's own confession. The truth was plain now. The broken Spurs had never been rustlers, only scapegoats. The crowd shifted, shame bending their spines as they realized what they'd done. Rourke stepped forward, his hands trembling as he knelt at Caleb's boots. From his pocket, he drew the broken rowels, the spurs that had once been stripped away. He set them back into place, pressing them firm as if to mend not just iron, but the man who wore them. Caleb lifted his eyes, not to the sheriff, not to the crowd, but to Clara. She stood there, hands clasped, eyes soft as dawnlight. No words passed between them, only a quiet smile, a touch of her hand on his arm, and the promise of something fragile yet enduring. And so, the story ended not with gunfire, nor gallows, but with grace. I tell you this, as one who watched it unfold. In a land where dust buries names quicker than the grave, a man may yet find redemption, not in the roar of his gun, but in the mercy of his heart. Remember the broken spurs, if ever you feel branded by shame. Even bent iron can shine again under the sun.